Big Shaq was just passing through his nephew's school when he noticed something that made him stop in his tracks. Three bullies had Jaden cornered, shoving him against a locker, laughing like they ruled the place. Students stood around watching, but no one dared to step in. They thought they were untouchable. They had no idea that standing just a few feet away, watching every second of their cruelty, was a 7 foot 1 inch nightmare they would never forget. What happened next didn't just shut them up. It humiliated them in front of the entire school, went viral online, and left them begging for mercy. Stay till the end, because this story will leave you stunned. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The deep purr of a black Escalade rumbled through the school parking lot as Big Shaq stepped out, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored suit. His presence alone was enough to turn heads, but today, he wasn't here for attention. He was here for Jaden. His nephew had no idea he was coming. Shaq wanted to surprise him with lunch after basketball training, but as he shook hands with the school principal at the entrance, something caught his eye down the long hallway. A group of students had gathered near the lockers, whispering, snickering. Then, smack! Jaden's books went flying, scattering across the floor like fallen leaves. He staggered forward, slamming against the cold metal lockers as laughter erupted around him. Ryan, Trey, and Dylan stood over him, grinning. The school's top bullies, entitled, cocky, and used to getting away with everything. "You don't belong here, nerd," Ryan sneered, towering over Jaden with his arms crossed. Jaden didn't flinch. He just inhaled sharply, bending down to pick up his books, his fingers tightening around the pages. Shaq's face darkened as he watched from afar, his towering frame still as a statue. His massive hands clenched into fists, but he didn't move, yet. His patience was legendary, but it had limits. One of the school's security guards standing near him shifted uncomfortably. He had also seen what happened and looked up at Shaq hesitantly. "Mr. O'Neill, should we step in?" the guard asked, his voice low. Shaq didn't take his eyes off Jaden and the bullies. His expression was unreadable, but his voice, deep, calm, yet carrying an undeniable weight, sent a chill through the air. "Not yet." The security guard swallowed hard. Shaq wasn't just watching, he was waiting. What's he waiting for? The bullies have no idea they just made the biggest mistake of their lives. Jaden inhaled sharply, keeping his head down as he stacked his books back into his arms. The sting from the locker was nothing compared to the humiliation of being shoved around in front of half the school. He had learned long ago that reacting only gave bullies more power, so he focused on gathering his things and standing tall, even as the laughter echoed around him. But Ryan wasn't done. As Jaden turned to leave, Ryan's hand shot out, yanking his backpack strap. The sudden force nearly pulled Jaden off balance. "Where are you going, punk?" Ryan sneered, his grip tightening. Jaden didn't answer, just kept his jaw clenched and his eyes forward. Trey and Dylan circled him like hyenas. Dylan unzipped Jaden's backpack with one swift motion, yanking out notebooks, pencils, and crumpling sheets of paper. With a smirk, he turned the bag upside down and dumped everything onto the floor. "Oops," he grinned mockingly. The hallway filled with amused whispers and stifled laughter. Students watched, but no one stepped in. Jaden let out a slow breath, his fingers twitching at his sides. Across the hall, Shaq's face darkened. His patience, already wearing thin, was nearly gone. His fingers flexed as he watched the scene unfold, his massive presence still unnoticed by the bullies. Jaden crouched down, gathering his things again, refusing to react. But Ryan wasn't satisfied with silence. "Yo, I think he's scared," Ryan said, exchanging grins with Trey and Dylan. He stepped forward and shoved Jaden, hard. Jaden staggered, but this time, he didn't just brush it off. He straightened slowly, meeting Ryan's smug expression with steady eyes. Ryan smirked, expecting him to stay quiet. But Jaden's voice was calm, steady, carrying a weight that sent a ripple through the air. "I'm not scared," he said, adjusting his backpack. Then with a smirk that mirrored his uncle's, he added, "My uncle taught me not to be scared of cowards." The hallway fell silent. The bullies blinked in confusion. They had no idea who Jaden's uncle was, or that he was watching. Ryan clenched his fist, his lips curling into a sneer as he raised his hand, ready to take a swing at Jaden. The tension in the hallway thickened, the air buzzing with anticipation. The other students, who had been enjoying the spectacle just moments ago, now watched with uneasy silence. But before Ryan could throw the punch, something changed. A massive, towering shadow swallowed the light above them. It loomed over Ryan, stretching across the tiled floor like a dark omen. The bullies felt it before they saw it. The shift in atmosphere, the quiet gasp of a student, the sudden drop in temperature, as if the very air had frozen in place. Ryan's arm stopped midair. A slow, creeping sense of dread crawled up his spine. He turned his head slightly, just enough to see what was behind him. And there stood Big Shaq, 7 feet 1 inch of solid muscle, arms crossed over his broad chest, eyes locked onto them with the kind of expression that made full-grown NBA players rethink their life choices. He wasn't just standing there. He was commanding the space. The entire hallway went silent. Even the students who had been recording stopped moving, their hands trembling slightly as they kept their phones aimed. Trey and Dylan's faces drained of color, their cocky grins vanishing in an instant. We didn't know," Dylan stammered, taking a step back, nearly tripping over Jaden's spilled books. Ryan, however, swallowed hard and tried to play it cool. He straightened his shoulders and scoffed. "Who the hell are you? His dad?" Shaq didn't even blink. He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a low, rumbling warning. "I'm his uncle." He let the words sink in for a second before adding, "That's worse for you." A nervous chuckle bubbled out of Trey's throat. "Ha, hey, we were just messing around, man. No big deal, right?" Shaq ignored him, his focus locked on Ryan. Ryan, still too dumb to recognize the sheer magnitude of the man in front of him, huffed and attempted to shove Shaq aside. Big mistake. The second Ryan's hands touched Shaq's suit, it was like trying to push a brick wall. He didn't move an inch. Instead, Shaq tilted his head slightly, just enough to let Ryan know he had just signed his own humiliation. Ryan's shove connected, but it felt like hitting a steel pillar. Shaq didn't budge, not even an inch. If anything, it looked like he barely registered the contact. He exhaled slowly, his massive frame looming over the smaller teen, like a mountain casting its shadow over a trembling hiker. The hallway was dead silent. Even the students recording had stopped whispering. Ryan's smirk wavered. He clenched his fists again, trying to mask his growing unease. Shaq tilted his head slightly, the motion deliberate and slow. His eyes locked onto Ryan with an intensity that sent an involuntary shiver down the boy's spine. "You want to try that again?" The words weren't loud. They weren't yelled, but they hit harder than any shove ever could. The kind of calm, controlled warning that grown men would take seriously, let alone a high school bully. Trey's confidence shattered first. He took a step back, hands up. "Whoa, we were just joking, man." His voice cracked. Dylan gulped and nodded rapidly. Yeah. It was just, you know, locker room stuff." Jaden, who had been silent through most of this, crossed his arms. "Funny, I wasn't laughing." Shaq's gaze flickered toward his nephew, his expression softening for a fraction of a second. Then he turned his attention back to the bullies. Ryan forced out a scoff, desperate to save face. "Look, man, we don't need to make this a big deal. No harm, no foul, right?" He took a step back, but Shaq stepped forward, and suddenly the space between them disappeared. Ryan stiffened, realizing that backing down wasn't going to be enough. Shaq cracked his knuckles, the sound echoing through the hallway. Then he tilted his head the other way, as if considering something. "You boys like playing games?" His voice rumbled, low and controlled. Ryan, Trey, and Dylan exchanged nervous glances. Shaq smirked. "Let's see how you like this one." The crowd leaned in, whispering. Shaq slowly lifted a hand and pointed toward the gym doors, the basketball court. The bullies' faces drained of color. They had no idea what was coming next. The tension in the air was palpable as Shaq stood towering over the three bullies, his expression unreadable, but his presence alone enough to send a shiver down their spines. Ryan, Trey, and Dylan had spent the last few minutes acting like they ran the school, humiliating Jaden without a care in the world. But now standing in front of a 7 foot 1 inch basketball legend, their confidence wavered. Shaq took a slow step forward, his deep voice cutting through the murmurs of the gathered crowd. "You three think you're tough, huh?" His gaze flickered between them, watching their postures shift uncomfortably. "All right, let's put that to the test." He turned slightly, pointing toward the double doors leading to the outdoor basketball court. "You three against me. We play to 21. If y'all win, you walk. If you lose—" He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in, before finishing with a slight smirk. "We settle things my way." A collective gasp rippled through the students. The idea of three high school kids going up against a former NBA superstar, one of the most dominant players to ever step on the court, was almost comical. Ryan forced a laugh, though his usual cockiness was replaced with unease. "Oh, that's easy." His voice cracked slightly at the end, betraying his nerves. Shaq tilted his head slightly, amused but unimpressed. "Yeah? Let's see then." Trey elbowed Dylan in the ribs, his voice low but urgent. "Dude, we got this. 3-on-1, man. He's old now." Dylan nodded quickly, though his eyes darted towards Shaq's massive hands, which could probably palm their entire heads like basketballs. Yeah, easy." But he didn't sound so sure. The crowd erupted into motion as students rushed toward the gym doors, eager to see what would happen next. Shaq walked slowly, his long strides effortless, while Jaden followed behind him, arms crossed, watching his tormentors with newfound confidence. As soon as the door swung open, the sun cast a golden glow over the polished outdoor basketball court, making the scene feel almost cinematic. The crowd pushed forward, filling every inch of space along the sidelines, whispering excitedly amongst themselves. This was about to be legendary. Shaq stepped onto the court, rolling his broad shoulders like he was warming up for a real game. He walked over to the ball rack, picking up a basketball with ease, spinning it in his massive hands like it weighed nothing. His deep voice carried through the hushed crowd. "We'll play standard rules, 1st to 21. Work together, do your best, 'cause trust me." He tossed the ball up, effortlessly catching it again in one hand. Then in one smooth motion, he extended his arm and spun the ball effortlessly on his fingertip, the motion hypnotic under the bright sun. "I don't play nice." The crowd leaned in, eyes locked on the court. Ryan swallowed hard. Trey wiped his palms on his jeans. Dylan glanced around as if searching for an escape. For the first time all day, none of them had anything to say. The game started with Ryan gripping the basketball tightly, his knuckles white as he tried to keep his composure. He knew the entire school was watching, cameras out, waiting to see him prove himself. His pride wouldn't let him back down. He took a deep breath, dribbled once, then twice, then sprinted forward, aiming to break past Shaq's defense. Big mistake. Before he could even take his second step, Shaq's massive hand slapped the ball away effortlessly, sending it bouncing across the court. The crowd erupted in laughter, their cheers echoing across the gym. Ryan froze, blinking in shock. He had never been blocked like that before. Trey scrambled after the ball, his hands trembling as he picked it up. He glanced at Dylan, his eyes silently pleading for a plan. Dylan nodded, took a step forward, and attempted a layup, his best shot at scoring. Shaq watched him with amusement, waiting until the last possible second before leaping off the ground. In an instant, his massive hand swatted the ball so hard it soared over the fence, landing in the parking lot. The students watching lost their minds. A chorus of gasps, laughter, and whistles filled the air as Shaq landed effortlessly, shaking his head. Jaden, who had been silent this entire time, finally cracked a small smile. Dylan, completely stunned, stood frozen under the hoop. Did he just... Ryan clenched his fists. "We're not done yet." Trey, desperate to redeem himself, called for the ball. He backed up, then sprinted forward, launching a shot from half court, a move he had practiced 1,000 times. It didn't matter. Shaq jumped, not reached, not leaned, jumped into the air, his body soaring higher than anyone thought possible. And then, with one hand, he caught the ball. Mid-air, the crowd exploded. Students screamed. Some dropped their phones in shock. Even the principal, who had been watching quietly from the sidelines, shook his head in disbelief. Ryan, Trey, and Dylan, they looked like they had just seen a ghost. Ryan's chest heaved with exhaustion. His hands were on his knees, sweat dripping from his forehead. He had played basketball for years, had dominated pickup games with his friends, had even thought about trying out for the school team. But this wasn't a game. This was humiliation. Ryan swallowed hard, trying to catch his breath. You're cheating." Shaq, completely relaxed, chuckled. "Nah," he said, spinning the ball on his finger again, looking completely unbothered. "Y'all just suck." Ryan wiped sweat from his forehead. His legs felt like jelly. He knew they were losing, but his pride wouldn't let him quit. Not yet. The scoreboard was brutal, 21-0. Ryan, Trey, and Dylan stood on the court, drenched in sweat, gasping for air. Their legs felt like cement, their pride crushed beyond repair. The final shot had been the worst. Shaq had dribbled past all three of them at once, spun in the air, and dunked so hard the backboard shook for 5 seconds straight. The entire school erupted in cheers. Phones were held high, cameras rolling from every angle. The sound of notifications dinging nonstop filled the air. Snapchats, TikToks, Instagram stories. Videos of the game were already making rounds online, spreading like wildfire. Big Shaq vs. School losers. Guess who won? This is worse than detention. Somebody check on them. Ryan, still bent over, checked his phone with shaky hands. His heart sank. His DMs were flooded. Hundreds of laughing emojis. Dozens of messages. Lemo! You just got cooked! Bro, don't come back to school tomorrow. 21-0? I'd transfer, no cap. His face burned with humiliation. Trey and Dylan peeked at their own phones, their eyes going wide with horror as they realized. This wasn't just a school thing anymore. The whole city was about to see this. Shaq wiped his forehead with a towel, completely unfazed, like he hadn't just obliterated them in front of the entire student body. He turned to Jaden. How'd I do? Jaden grinned, arms crossed. Decent. The crowd laughed again, making Ryan's humiliation even worse. Shaq clapped his hands, getting everyone's attention. All right, we had some fun, but we ain't done yet. Ryan's stomach dropped. Trey wiped his face. Hold up. You said if we lost, the game would settle everything. Shaq raised an eyebrow. I said if you won, you could walk. But y'all lost. So now, we settle things my way. Ryan gulped. What does that mean? Shaq smirked. Oh, you'll see. Ryan's legs shook beneath him. His chest rose and fell with ragged breath, sweat dripping down his temple as he glanced around. Hundreds of students were staring, phones still recording, whispers buzzing through the crowd like static. He swallowed hard. This wasn't how today was supposed to go. A few hours ago, he had felt untouchable, laughing as he shoved Jaden into lockers, dumping his books onto the floor. Now he was standing in the middle of the court, completely destroyed, humiliated, and cornered by a 7-foot giant, and it wasn't over. Shaq crossed his arms, his towering frame casting a shadow over all three bullies. His voice was deep, calm, but carried a weight that sent chills down Ryan's spine. You bullied my nephew in front of the whole school. His eyes locked onto them, unreadable yet piercing. Now you apologize in front of the whole school. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. Trey shifted uncomfortably, his hands gripping his phone like a lifeline. Dylan's face was still flushed from the game, his breathing shaky. Ryan clenched his fists. Man, we were just messing around. Shaq took one step forward. The air changed. Say it. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through everything. The crowd fell dead silent again. Even the trees lining the basketball court seemed to stop rustling. Trey caved first. His shoulders slumped, his confidence long gone. He turned to Jaden, forcing the words out. Jaden, I'm sorry. Dylan hesitated for a second, but with Shaq's stare burning into him, he quickly nodded. Yeah, sorry, man. Jaden didn't respond, just watching them with a calm expression, his posture steadier than theirs had ever been. Ryan, though? He stayed frozen. His pride clashed with his fear, his mind racing for a way out. Shaq raised an eyebrow. What's the holdup? Ryan licked his lips, shifting from foot to foot. Shaq took another step closer, tilting his head. I'm waiting. Ryan's jaw tightened, his whole body tensed. Was he really about to do this? The heavy wooden doors of the school creaked open, and Principal Howard stepped outside, his expression unreadable. He adjusted his glasses, his sharp eyes scanning the crowd of students still gathered around the basketball court. He had been watching everything from his office window, and now it was time to step in. Shaq turned slightly as the principal approached, arms still crossed over his chest. Jaden, standing beside him, straightened up, sensing that whatever was about to happen next was bigger than just an apology. Ryan, Trey, and Dylan stood in a row, their heads lowered, breathing heavily from the humiliation they just suffered. Their faces were pale, their bodies stiff, as if they were bracing for something even worse than the 21-0 blowout. Principal Howard cleared his throat. Shaq, can we talk? Shaq didn't move. His deep voice rumbled. Nah, we're doing this right here. The principal sighed, looking at the three bullies. His patience had run out. You boys have been warned before, he said, shaking his head. His voice was firm but tired, like he had dealt with this exact issue too many times. This isn't the first complaint I've had about you. It's not even the 10th. Ryan's eyes darted up. Sir, enough, Principal Howard cut him off, his expression darkening. He reached into the folder he carried under his arm and pulled out 3 slips of paper. Suspension notices. The color drained from Trey's face. Dylan let out a nervous breath, while Ryan just stood there frozen, his hands clenched into fists. You're out, the principal stated, handing the slips to each of them. 2 weeks, effective immediately. Ryan's grip on the paper tightened, his whole body tensed. Was he really about to fight this? Or was this finally the moment he realized he had lost? The tension in the air was thick as the finality of the principal's decision sank in. Ryan, Trey, and Dylan stood frozen, each gripping their suspension slips like they were death sentences. The crowd of students that had once laughed alongside them now whispered amongst themselves, some filming, others shaking their heads, but the real storm was yet to come. Just then, the school doors burst open, and in stormed Ryan's parents. His mother, an elegant but furious woman in a beige blazer, was practically dragging his father along as she marched toward them, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. "Ryan Alexander Carter!" she shouted, her voice slicing through the air like a whip. Ryan winced. "Mom, it's not—" She didn't let him finish. She grabbed the suspension slip from his hand and skimmed it, her face growing redder with every second. Then, in one swift motion, she smacked the back of his head. "Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is for our family?" She seethed, eyes narrowing. "Bullying? Public humiliation? A basketball game against Shaquille O'Neal?" Ryan's father sighed, shaking his head. "You're a disappointment, son." Trey and Dylan barely had time to process what was happening when their parents arrived next. Trey's mom, a short but fiery woman with a steel grip on her son's ear, wasted no time. "You want to tell me what I just watched on the internet, Trey? Huh? Because from what I saw, my son's acting like a fool." "Mom! Ow, wait!" Trey yelped as she twisted his ear harder. "You had the nerve to humiliate a kid in front of the school. But when it was your turn, you got embarrassed on camera for the whole world to see. And you expect me to defend you?" Dylan, who had been standing stiffly, flinched as his dad, a tall, broad-shouldered man in a work uniform, approached Shaq first instead of him. Dylan's father extended a hand. "Thank you, sir," he said sincerely, shaking Shaq's massive hand firmly. "My son needed that. He's been getting away with too much for too long." Dylan's jaw dropped. "Dad?" His father didn't even look at him. "You earned that embarrassment, son." The crowd was eating up the chaos unfolding in front of them. Students gasped, whispered, and recorded every second. This was no longer just a suspension. This was a reckoning. Ryan, Trey, and Dylan weren't just facing punishment from the school anymore. They were getting torn apart by their own parents. Shaq watched it all, his arms still crossed, a knowing smirk on his face. This wasn't just karma. It was poetic justice. Jaden, standing beside him, exhaled slowly. The boy who had once been shoved into lockers and laughed at now, watched as his bullies crumbled in front of everyone. Shaq finally turned to his nephew, his voice deep and calm. "We done here?" Jaden glanced at the defeated bullies, then at their furious parents. He took one last look at Ryan, who was on the verge of tears, and smirked. "Yeah, we're done." The school courtyard was still buzzing with murmurs and whispers as the echoes of humiliation hung in the air. Ryan, Trey, and Dylan stood there, shoulders slumped, faces burning with shame as their parents continued to berate them. The students who once laughed at Jaden's expense now had their eyes glued to Shaquille O'Neal, their expressions a mix of awe and admiration. Shaq turned, scanning the sea of young faces. He knew they had all witnessed something today, something bigger than just a schoolyard lesson. This wasn't just about bullies getting what they deserved. This was about making sure it never happened again. He placed his massive hands in his pockets and took a deep breath before speaking, his voice calm but commanding. "Let me tell y'all something," Shaq began, his deep baritone silencing the crowd. "Strength ain't about size. It's not about how many people you can push around. It's about how many people you can lift up." The weight of his words settled over the students, and some of them shifted uncomfortably. They had laughed, along with the bullies before, but now they were rethinking everything. Shaq glanced at Jaden, who stood taller than ever, confidence radiating from him. I hope y'all were paying attention today, Shaq continued, looking directly at the students who had done nothing while Jaden was tormented. 'Cause next time, it might not be my nephew who needs help. It might be one of y'all. And when that happens, ask yourself, are you going to be part of the problem or part of the solution? A murmur spread through the crowd. Some students nodded. Others looked down, suddenly ashamed. Then slowly, applause began. One student clapped, then another, and another. Within seconds, the entire courtyard erupted into cheers. Jaden grinned, his eyes lighting up as he looked at his uncle. For the first time, he wasn't invisible. He wasn't just the quiet kid who got picked on. He was the kid who stood his ground, the kid who won. Shaq gave him a subtle nod. Mission accomplished. But then, a voice, low and bitter, cut through the celebration. I'll get my revenge. Ryan, his fists clenched at his sides, his face twisted with anger, his pride still stinging. Shaq turned his head slowly, and when his gaze locked onto Ryan, the smirk on the bully's face disappeared instantly. Shaq took one step toward Ryan. You really want to try that? The moment Shaq took a step forward, the entire schoolyard held its breath. Ryan had muttered those last words. I'll get my revenge. But now, under the weight of Shaq's towering presence, he regretted it instantly. The difference in their size was almost laughable. Ryan wasn't small, but compared to Shaq, he looked like a twig standing in the shadow of a mountain. Shaq didn't say a word at first. He just stood there staring down at Ryan, his deep-set eyes locked onto the boy like a hunter sizing up prey. The air grew thick with tension. Ryan gulped. His bravado cracked. His fingers twitched at his sides as if he was debating whether to stand his ground or bolt. Shaq tilted his head slightly, amusement flashing in his eyes. You really want to try that? Ryan swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. A single bead of sweat slid down his temple. Dylan and Trey had already backed up, their heads lowered in shame. They weren't stupid enough to test Shaq twice. But Ryan? He had too much pride left. He clenched his fists, forcing himself to meet Shaq's gaze, but his knees slightly buckled. The crowd was silent. Students waited, phones still recording, wondering if Ryan would dig himself into a deeper grave. Then finally, he cracked. Ryan took a small step back, then another, his lips parting like he wanted to say something, but no words came. His chest rose and fell with heavy breaths, but no amount of fake toughness could save him now. No, I'm good, he stammered, barely above a whisper. Shaq smirked. That's what I thought. The tension snapped, and the schoolyard erupted into laughter. Ryan's face burned as students whispered and chuckled, his downfall now cemented in history. Shaq didn't bother sparing him another glance. Instead, he turned to Jaden, who stood tall, a new confidence glowing in his eyes. Shaq placed a massive hand on his nephew's shoulder. You hungry? Jaden grinned, shaking his head in disbelief. Always. As they walked away together, students still whispering in awe, one thing was certain, Jaden would never be bullied again. Behind them, Ryan stood frozen, fists clenched, staring at the ground. His empire of fear was over.